HMP Belmarsh is not loud. It does not rely on chaos, intimidation, or constant violence to maintain control. Instead, it operates quietly, through systems, routines, and rules that rarely bend. Often called Britain's Guantánamo, Belmarsh exists to hold the prisoners the UK considers too dangerous, too unstable, or too high risk for ordinary prisons. Located in southeast London, behind multiple layers of fencing and surveillance, Belmarsh was built with one purpose: containment. It is a Category A prison, the highest security level in the United Kingdom. Inmates sent here include terrorists, organised crime figures, and prisoners considered extreme escape risks. But what defines Belmarsh is not who is held there, it is how they are held. From the moment an inmate arrives, the system begins working on them. Processing is slow, deliberate, and impersonal. Prisoners are searched thoroughly, documented, photographed, and assessed. Every detail matters. Risk level, mental health history, affiliations, and past behavior all determine how the inmate will be treated from the very beginning. Unlike in many American prisons, aggression from staff is not the primary tool of control. Officers at Belmarsh rarely shout. Physical force exists, but it is used sparingly. The real power comes from procedure. Every action, every movement, every privilege is regulated by written rules, and those rules are enforced without emotion. Cells at Belmarsh are small but controlled. Most inmates are housed in single or double cells. Each cell contains a bed, a toilet, and minimal furnishings. There is no privacy. The toilet is exposed. The lighting is harsh and functional. Windows are narrow, designed to allow light but prevent views of the outside world. Inmates spend large portions of the day locked inside these cells. Movement is not spontaneous. Doors open only when scheduled. Officers decide when inmates leave, where they go, and how long they stay. Even walking down a corridor is monitored. This is how Belmarsh maintains order, not through fear, but through predictability. Every day follows a strict routine. Wake-up times are fixed. Meals are delivered on schedule. Exercise periods are short and controlled. Association time, when inmates are allowed limited interaction, is tightly regulated and can be revoked instantly. Privileges are everything inside Belmarsh. Phone calls, visits, access to television, books, education, even the ability to buy basic items from the prison canteen, all of it can be taken away without warning. Discipline does not come in the form of beatings or threats. It comes through removal. If an inmate breaks a rule, even a minor one, consequences follow quietly. Access is reduced. Time outside the cell is shortened. Reviews are delayed. Appeals are slow. This creates a constant psychological pressure. Inmates quickly learn that resistance does not bring relief. It only tightens control. Belmarsh also uses segregation units extensively. Inmates considered disruptive, violent, or high risk can be placed in segregation for extended periods. These units are designed for isolation. Cells are even more restrictive. Human contact is minimal. Time outside the cell is extremely limited. Segregation is not framed as punishment. It is framed as management. But for inmates, the effect is the same. Isolation deepens. Time slows. The mind turns inward. Mental health is a major concern at Belmarsh. Many inmates arrive already struggling with psychological issues. Long periods of confinement, uncertainty about legal outcomes, and constant monitoring amplify those problems. Anxiety, paranoia, and depression are common. The prison provides mental health services, but access is limited and slow. Treatment happens on the system's timeline, not the inmates. Appointments are scheduled weeks or months out. Crisis intervention exists, but it is reactive, not preventive. For inmates held on terrorism-related charges or national security cases, conditions can be even stricter. Communication is monitored closely. Contact with other inmates may be limited. Legal processes move slowly, increasing uncertainty and stress. This is where Belmarsh differs sharply from public perception. Many believe UK prisons are lenient. Belmarsh is not lenient. It is restrained, methodical, and psychologically heavy. There are no dramatic confrontations. No visible brutality. Control is achieved through waiting, paperwork, and routine. Inmates are constantly assessed. Behavior is documented. Reports follow them from unit to unit. A single negative entry can affect housing, privileges, or progression for months. Positive behavior does not guarantee reward. It simply prevents punishment. This creates a unique pressure. Inmates must behave perfectly just to maintain the status quo. Relationships between officers and inmates are formal and distant. Officers are trained to maintain professionalism, not familiarity. Conversations are brief. Emotional engagement is discouraged. Authority is reinforced through procedure rather than presence. Belmarsh is not designed to rehabilitate inmates for release in the near future. Many prisoners held here are awaiting trial, appeal, or long sentences. The system assumes risk first, rehabilitation later, if at all. Education and work programs exist, but access depends on classification and behavior. Many high-risk inmates spend long periods without meaningful activity. Time becomes empty. Days blur together. This emptiness is one of the prison's most powerful tools. Without stimulation, without progress, inmates are left alone with their thoughts. For some, this leads to reflection. For others, it leads to deterioration. The system does not intervene unless behavior becomes disruptive. Belmarsh does not seek to break inmates through violence. It seeks to manage them through control and endurance. And for many inmates, the most difficult part is not the restrictions themselves. It is the uncertainty. Legal cases drag on. Sentences are unclear. Reviews offer no guarantees. Life feels paused, but without an end date. Belmarsh exists in this suspended state, holding people in limbo while the system decides their fate. This is only the beginning of how Belmarsh works. Because once inmates settle into the routine, the deeper effects of this environment begin to show, not on their behavior, but on their minds. Once inmates settle into the rigid routine of HMP Belmarsh, the true weight of the system begins to reveal itself. Control here is not immediate or explosive. It is gradual. It accumulates over time, pressing down through repetition, restriction, and uncertainty. Belmarsh does not overwhelm inmates with constant confrontation. Instead, it places them inside a structure where nothing moves quickly. Not decisions, not progress, not relief. Days stretch. Weeks blur. And the lack of meaningful change becomes its own form of pressure. Every inmate at Belmarsh is subject to constant assessment. Behavior is monitored quietly. Officers take notes. Reports are filed. Patterns are tracked. These records follow inmates everywhere inside the prison. A single incident, even a minor one, can shape months of confinement. Progression through the system is slow and conditional. Inmates may apply for small improvements, more association time, access to education, limited work opportunities, but approvals are not guaranteed. Decisions are often delayed. Explanations are minimal. Appeals exist, but they move at the pace of bureaucracy. This creates a sense of helplessness that many inmates struggle to manage. Unlike systems that rely on visible punishment, Belmarsh relies on anticipation. Inmates are constantly waiting for reviews, waiting for hearings, waiting for responses that may never come. Time becomes a weapon. The longer nothing happens, the heavier the confinement feels. Segregation plays a central role in maintaining this control. Inmates placed in segregation are removed from even the limited interaction available in general population. Cells are more restrictive. Exercise is shorter and often solitary. Human contact is reduced to the bare minimum required for safety. Segregation is justified as a management tool rather than punishment, but its effects are unmistakable. Extended isolation amplifies anxiety, distorts perception of time, and weakens emotional resilience. Some inmates become withdrawn. Others become increasingly agitated. Mental health deterioration is a persistent issue at Belmarsh. Many inmates arrive already carrying trauma, addiction, or psychological disorders. The prison environment magnifies these conditions. The lack of stimulation, uncertainty about legal outcomes, and constant surveillance create a pressure cooker that few can withstand indefinitely. Mental health services exist, but they are stretched thin. Access to psychologists or psychiatrists is limited. Appointments are brief. Medication is common, therapy less so. Crisis intervention often comes only after a breaking point has been reached. Self-harm incidents are not uncommon. The prison responds through observation protocols, increased monitoring, restricted items, closer supervision. But these measures treat symptoms, not causes. The underlying environment remains unchanged. Belmarsh's approach to security is uncompromising. Movement within the prison is choreographed. Inmates are escorted. Corridors are cleared. Doors open and close in sequence. Cameras track everything. Nothing is accidental. This constant monitoring reinforces the sense that privacy does not exist. Even moments that feel personal, phone calls, showers, quiet time in a cell, occur under the assumption of observation. Inmates learn to self-censor, to control not just their actions but their expressions. Communication is another area where control is tightly enforced. Phone calls are monitored. Letters can be delayed or withheld. Visits are restricted and closely supervised. Physical contact is limited. Conversations are recorded. For inmates facing terrorism-related charges or national security concerns, these restrictions intensify. Legal correspondence is scrutinized. Association with other inmates is limited. Isolation becomes deeper, and uncertainty grows heavier. The legal limbo many inmates experience compounds the pressure. Belmarsh holds both convicted prisoners and those awaiting trial or appeal. For the latter, confinement is paired with uncertainty about outcome and length. Days pass without clarity. Legal timelines stretch unpredictably. This suspended state is psychologically exhausting. Inmates cannot plan. They cannot prepare. They exist in a permanent present, where the future is undefined and the past is immutable. Officers at Belmarsh are trained to maintain distance. Familiarity is discouraged. Emotional involvement is avoided. Authority is enforced through procedure, not personality. This reduces the likelihood of manipulation or favoritism, but it also creates an atmosphere of detachment. For inmates, this detachment can feel dehumanizing. Requests are processed, not discussed. Concerns are logged, not resolved. Interaction becomes transactional. Work and education opportunities are limited, especially for high-risk inmates. When available, they offer structure but little progression. There is no clear path toward improvement. Participation does not guarantee advancement or early release. It simply fills time. Time itself becomes the central punishment. Hours locked in cells. Limited exercise. Short interactions. Endless waiting. The absence of meaningful milestones makes time feel heavier than confinement alone. Some inmates cope by withdrawing emotionally. Others focus obsessively on routines. A few attempt to assert control through minor acts of defiance, refusing orders, arguing technicalities, filing complaints. These acts rarely succeed and often result in further restriction. The system absorbs resistance without reaction. Belmarsh's effectiveness lies in its predictability. Rules are enforced consistently. Consequences are applied methodically. There is little room for negotiation. This predictability reduces chaos but increases psychological strain. Inmates quickly learn that the system will not bend. Anger fades into caution. Hope becomes fragile. Survival depends on compliance. For those held long-term, identity begins to shift. Life outside the prison becomes abstract. The outside world feels distant, unreal. News events pass without personal connection. Technology advances without relevance. Belmarsh becomes the reference point for everything. This transformation is subtle but profound. Inmates do not always notice it happening. It reveals itself in small ways: forgotten phone numbers, fading memories, loss of interest in outside events. The prison becomes the center of existence. Despite its reputation, Belmarsh rarely appears dramatic. There are no constant riots. No daily violence. Control is quiet. The tension is internal rather than external. This makes Belmarsh harder to understand from the outside. Observers who expect visible brutality miss the deeper impact. The prison's power lies not in force, but in endurance. It does not break inmates quickly. It wears them down slowly. And as months turn into years, the cost of this environment becomes increasingly clear, not in headlines or statistics, but in the mental and emotional state of the people living inside it. This is how Belmarsh works. Over time, the effects of confinement at HMP Belmarsh begin to surface in ways that are not immediately visible. There are no obvious signs of collapse. Instead, change happens quietly, internally, as inmates adapt to an environment designed to limit uncertainty by removing choice. One of the most significant impacts is the erosion of autonomy. In Belmarsh, inmates do not decide when to wake up, when to eat, when to move, or when to speak to others. Every decision is external. Even small actions, such as making a phone call or requesting a shower, require approval. At first, this loss of control feels temporary. Many inmates assume it will ease over time, or that good behavior will lead to greater freedom. But as months pass, it becomes clear that autonomy is not something earned easily. It is rationed. This rationing shapes behavior. Inmates learn to measure their actions carefully, not because they believe in the rules, but because deviation brings consequences that make daily life more difficult. The system does not need to threaten violence. The threat of reduced access is enough. Belmarsh relies heavily on incentive-based compliance. Inmates who follow rules are not rewarded with freedom, but with fewer restrictions. This distinction matters. The system does not offer progress in the traditional sense. It offers relief from pressure. For inmates, relief becomes the goal. This dynamic creates a quiet form of self-regulation. Prisoners monitor their own behavior closely. They avoid conflict. They limit interaction. They internalize the rules to reduce friction with the system. Over time, this self-policing becomes automatic. Psychologically, this has consequences. Inmates often report a narrowing of emotional range. High emotions, anger, excitement, optimism, fade. Neutrality becomes safer. Emotional restraint reduces attention from staff and lowers the risk of negative reports. Expression becomes calculated. This emotional flattening is not unique to Belmarsh, but the prison structure accelerates it. The combination of isolation, surveillance, and uncertainty discourages spontaneity. Life becomes cautious. Another effect is the distortion of time perception. Without meaningful variation in daily routine, days lose distinction. Weeks pass unnoticed. Events that would normally mark time, holidays, seasons, milestones, feel distant or irrelevant. Some inmates describe time at Belmarsh as suspended rather than moving forward. The future exists only in theory. Legal outcomes remain uncertain. Transfers are unpredictable. Reviews offer no guarantees. This uncertainty is especially heavy for remand prisoners, those awaiting trial or sentencing. They are confined under the same conditions as convicted inmates, often for months or years, without knowing the length or outcome of their confinement. For these inmates, Belmarsh becomes a holding space for unresolved futures. The psychological strain of this limbo is significant. Anxiety increases. Sleep patterns become irregular. Concentration declines. The mind struggles to settle when nothing feels resolved. Belmarsh's response to mental distress is procedural. Inmates showing signs of instability are monitored more closely. Observation protocols are implemented. Items may be removed from cells. Contact is increased, but only to the extent necessary for safety. What is rarely addressed is the environment itself. The prison operates under the assumption that individuals must adapt to the system, not the other way around. Mental health support is framed as a corrective measure, not a systemic responsibility. For some inmates, this leads to withdrawal. They speak less. They interact minimally. They comply quietly. From an administrative perspective, these inmates are considered stable. But stability, in this context, often means resignation. Belmarsh's reputation as a high-security facility also affects how inmates are treated externally. Legal processes move cautiously. Transfers to lower security prisons are rare and slow. Risk assessments prioritize worst-case scenarios. Once an inmate is labeled high risk, shedding that classification becomes difficult. Behavior must remain flawless for extended periods, and even then, decisions may not change. Risk categories tend to stick. This reinforces the sense of permanence. Inmates feel trapped not just by walls, but by records and reports that define them long after circumstances change. The prison's architecture reinforces this feeling. Corridors are narrow. Doors are heavy. Natural light is limited. Views of the outside are restricted. The environment communicates containment at every level. Even exercise yards are enclosed, functional, and closely monitored. Physical movement is permitted, but freedom of movement is not. The body is allowed activity, but the mind remains confined. Belmarsh also limits social interaction deliberately. Association periods are short. Groups are small. Mixing between different categories of inmates is controlled. This prevents collective organization but also reduces meaningful human connection. Friendships exist, but they are cautious. Trust is limited. Conversations are restrained. Inmates are aware that information can be overheard, misinterpreted, or recorded. This constant awareness shapes communication. People speak carefully. Silence becomes common. Over time, the lack of genuine connection affects identity. Humans define themselves through relationships. In Belmarsh, those relationships are constrained, monitored, and temporary. Identity becomes internal rather than social. Inmates rely on routine to anchor themselves. Wake up, meals, movement, lock up. The day becomes predictable, even if the future is not. Routine provides a sense of control within an uncontrollable environment. For some, this routine is stabilizing. For others, it is suffocating. The longer inmates remain at Belmarsh, the harder it becomes to imagine life outside. Even those who expect eventual release find it difficult to visualize freedom. The outside world feels distant, abstract, and overwhelming. This is not because Belmarsh is physically brutal. It is because it is mentally exacting. The prison does not need to assert dominance openly. Its power lies in consistency. The rules do not change. The environment does not soften. Time does not offer relief. In this way, Belmarsh represents a distinct philosophy of incarceration. It does not rely on fear of immediate harm. It relies on endurance. It tests how long a person can exist under controlled conditions without meaningful change. For many inmates, the test is ongoing. Some adapt completely. Others struggle silently. A few deteriorate visibly. But the system continues to function, largely unchanged, absorbing each response without disruption. From the outside, Belmarsh appears orderly. Inside, the cost of that order is carried quietly by those living within it. And as months turn into years, the question becomes less about how inmates are treated, and more about what that treatment does to them over time. Over time, life inside HMP Belmarsh becomes less about punishment and more about endurance. The prison does not rely on violence or chaos to enforce control. It relies on consistency. The rules do not change. The routine does not bend. And the system rarely explains itself. For inmates, this creates a quiet realization. Resistance offers no reward. Anger leads only to restriction. Hope, when placed in uncertain outcomes, becomes exhausting. So most learn to adapt, not because they agree with the system, but because survival depends on it. Belmarsh does not strip inmates of humanity through force. It does so through process. Every request is formal. Every movement is approved. Every privilege is conditional. Over time, life becomes a sequence of permissions rather than choices. This form of control is subtle, but powerful. It reshapes behavior without confrontation. It encourages compliance without conversation. And it places the weight of confinement not on the body, but on the mind. For some inmates, this environment creates stability. Violence is rare. Order is maintained. The prison functions as intended. But for others, the psychological cost is high. Prolonged uncertainty, limited human connection, and constant observation slowly erode emotional resilience. Belmarsh is often misunderstood from the outside. It is not a place of constant brutality. It is a place of calculation. Every aspect of life is managed. Every risk is anticipated. Every outcome is controlled as much as possible. This is why Belmarsh stands apart from other prisons. It does not seek to intimidate. It seeks to contain, efficiently, quietly, and indefinitely. Whether this approach represents justice or excess depends on perspective. Supporters argue it protects society and maintains order. Critics argue it trades visible punishment for invisible harm. What is clear is that Belmarsh leaves its mark. Not through spectacle. Not through violence. But through time. For those inside, the sentence is not defined only by years or verdicts. It is defined by routine, restriction, and the slow adjustment to a life where nothing happens quickly and nothing changes easily. This is how Britain holds its most dangerous inmates. And this is what life inside HMP Belmarsh truly looks like.